This episode's made possible by Planful.
Hi, I'm Taryn Aronson, CFO of Tovala. You are listening to CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 959.
Space has evolved in being a contested environment. We have Russia and China posing some of the biggest threats to U.S. national security. A lot of that actually starts in or is, managed or monitored in some form or fashion in space. So space is a really essential domain to really protecting peace, the interests of the U.S., our allies, and our partners. And we were founded by a team of space operators who really grew up in the relevant branches of Space Force, Air Force, wrote and helped define a lot of the tactics in modern space security operations. And they founded True Anomaly because they didn't think there was a partner out there who was well positioned to actually go solve the needs, the problems that the space operators were facing. And so what we're doing is we're building an integrated solution for space superiority. This is comprised of a software platform. It's an operating system we call Mosaic. We really sell an integrated solution that focuses on training and readiness, space domain awareness, rapid response missions. It really encompasses the entire life of an operator.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Mark Seidel, CFO of True Anomaly. If Mark Seidel had told us that he had spent evenings in high school peering through a telescope at the stars, we would have likely believed him. However, Seidel, CFO of space security startup True Anomaly, swiftly short-circuits the familiar narrative of a space-loving youth. Instead, he tells us that he has long preferred not to narrow his lens, but widen it. Such was the case at Goldman Sachs, where Seidel spent 7 career years as an investment banker, where he distinguished himself as a generalist rather than an industry-specific banker. It's the same preference for a wide lens that Seidel tells us drew him to the CFO role at True Anomaly, the defense tech space security company that only yesterday, following the taping of this interview, announced it had raised $100 million in Series B funding, an indication that CFO Seidel's lens is not likely to narrow anytime soon. CFO Mark Seidel joins us after this.
Hi, I'm Rowan Tonkin, Chief Marketing Officer at Planful, and we're a proud sponsor of CFO Thought Leader. At Planful, we're empowering teams just like yours to drive peak financial performance in every corner of your business. What sets Planful apart? We have purpose-built applications for every department, from FP&A to accounting, marketing to HR, all with built-in financial intelligence. This means we can get you up and running within weeks, and it requires minimal IT involvement. So you can rapidly and seamlessly engage everyone across the business in your key financial processes. Best of all, you can't outgrow us. We take the pain of growing away with an unmatched ability to scale with you. You have an endless runway with Planful. See why over 1,300 customers around the world choose Planful as their flexible, user-friendly, end-to-end financial performance management platform. Go to planful.com and see how you can make financial performance a team sport in your business.
Hello, we're speaking with Mark Seidel, CFO of True Anomaly. Mark, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So we begin where we always do, which is asking the guest to look back, Mark. We want to know, what were those experiences you feel prepared you for this role? What would come to mind for you?
Yeah, probably a few examples to, really goes through the career arc, but I'm going to start a little bit more historically with my childhood. So I had sort of 3 jobs and experiences growing up. I was a bagger at a grocery store, I was a snowboard instructor, and I ran my own eBay business. So really at the core, all of these things are about sort of people and money. But they leveraged very different sort of parts of my brain and arguably even different personas, whether it's sort of the support role, the teacher, the salesman. I think all of those are very relevant to the role of a CFO at the end of the day. So grew up a little bit, went to college. I was very fortunate to start my career with Goldman Sachs. I started really in the investment management division before moving into investment banking, where I spent the bulk of my time. Look, in a place like Goldman, it's a professional services firm, right? And so I think one of the key aspects there is like I still place the same emphasis on the quality and caliber of work internally as I did when I was serving clients. And I think that's something that has really echoed through how I not only think about my own work product but also my teams. Another thing about Goldman is it is a great experience. You sort of basically work 3 years in a given year, so there's a lot within there. But I was a really big fan of the caliber of the people. It's a lot better if you're not the smartest person in the room and you actually, sit there and very thoughtfully absorb other information. And that was one of the great things about Goldman, is I found myself with people who were, much more intelligent than I was. And I was able to really, learn from them along the way. Another aspect of that, in particular in the banking world, is like you quickly go from an analyst to a middle manager to really, leading multi-billion-dollar deals. And there's a lot of sort of not only internal team management, but external stakeholder management of how do you actually go from start to finish, driving a process, working with a variety of different stakeholders, your own client, the counterparty, legal, et cetera. And you get to do that in a pretty unique stage in your career. And so I really had a great time there. My final year at Goldman, I was the business unit manager for the West region. So I had about 200 bankers in 3 offices on the West Coast. That is really where I probably got most of my sort of like HR and human resources and resourcing lens at large. And I still carry a lot of that, to how I operate today, a lot more cross-functionally internally. So yeah, those are probably a couple of examples I have. I think each of those touch on a little bit of where I am historically. After Goldman, I did make the pivot to startups. So I worked at 3 startups at this stage. First was a SoftBank and Sequoia-backed company. Great first operating experience there. And then I made the jump into the world of space startups, which is a little bit different of a landscape. I had no space background, didn't grow up wanting to be an astronaut. It was all new for me, but I frankly fell in love with it. And so I spent 3 years at a rocket company, really sort of building and scaling that business, going from about 200 to 1,000 people. And then I made the jump to True Anomaly, about 5 or 6 months ago. And so I'm sort of firmly planted into these sort of complex, capital-intensive businesses. I found that to be a little bit of my sweet spot. Very much enjoy that sort of world of complexity where there's not really KPIs that you use to manage a business in the way that you might at a traditional SaaS company. And it's been a great experience since I've been here and really been enjoying it.
I just want to go back to Goldman Sachs for just a moment here. Yeah, and you described the dynamics really well for us in terms of all the coordination and collaboration that takes place around the table and the people who are involved in it. But we'd be interested in when you were more junior and you were managing the partners above you, managing up, I guess. Was there an example or something that comes to mind where you were summoned by a partner into a meeting or a client setting where they wanted your expertise? Was there a time such as that where you remember for the first time being tapped on the shoulder?
Yeah. No, look, it happens pretty often, and frankly, is fortunate to be attending meetings with C-level executives at pretty junior levels. And the benefit of being junior and being in those meetings is you're actually closest to the details, right? And so when things come up that the partners, frankly, they haven't opened the Excel model, they don't really know how the work was pulled together, you get thrust into the spotlight pretty quickly and are relied upon to be able to speak to it in a way that is not like, well, let me walk you through this specific like Excel formula, but both with hey, I can really articulate the details, but also why it matters at a high level. And so I think that was a big reason, as well as why I was successful in Goldman and throughout my career, is actually being able to sort of get in the weeds, but also zoom out and articulate things in a way that others can understand that aren't, truly just stuck in an Excel model or some calculations.
Your initial, and I think it could be an obvious answer here, but I just imagine you for the first time observing C-suite executives around the table with your Goldman colleagues. And, what is are you surprised in any one way about the type of conversation that's taking place? Whether the management seemed alert or disengaged, or what would you tell us about your early observations about C-suite people?
It's a great question. I would say it's maybe somewhat complex, right? When you used to also get thrown in these rooms, like I was a young guy sitting at a table with an exec, like you're partially terrified in some form or fashion, right? It's like, oh, I hope they don't ask me that question because I'm really going to have to really show up well here. But look, I think there's different flavors of executives at the end of the day, right? And so you really have to meet them with where they are and the type of information that they want to receive or are sort of willing to receive. In terms of engagement, it really depends on the topic. A place like Goldman, I was a generalist, so I covered all different types of industries, all different types of transactions, which means sort of the breadth and scope of the type of topics was incredibly wide, which has its pros and cons. I very much love that, but that means your ability to go super deep in a given topic can be somewhat more limited. And so, look, I think execs, it really depends on the stage of a given transaction or a deal, right? There's plenty of items where you're in there pitching, they're sitting there listening to meeting, ultimately not that interested. You're one of 6 banks coming through that day. There's others where you are deeply ingrained in a process. You're picking up the phone or being in person, actually talking to the CFO. They're really digging into sort of the set of materials, the type of analysis. But I think the one that had always struck me is, and this is, I think, has had some implications for how I have evolved as a leader, is the CFOs who really think more strategically and cross-functionally and about the business strategy, not just about the financials. And that to me is an entirely different lens than just running off of historical financials and doing budgeting and reporting and all that good stuff. And so there's definitely some executives along the way that definitely left an impression in that regard, where it wasn't just about the financials. It was really a bit more about the strategic lens of what we're doing and why, how we're going to do it, and then what it means for the financials.
When you do leave, we have something, the operations itch. Very often, executives like yourself stepping out of investment banking tell us they just always wanted to be an operator. Was that your case, or was there something more that you were looking for?
So, in full transparency, I left Goldman without a job. I was ready to switch gears a little bit. I was moving back and forth between San Francisco and LA. It was right at the end of that year in management, which was sort of a 1-year stint, and it was just sort of the perfect time. So I did that actually very intentionally because I wanted to do some soul searching around really what I wanted to do next. There's sort of both the stage of business, the type of role. There's investing versus operating. Sort of all natural considerations for a lot of people who leave the world of professional services. I found myself very much gravitating towards startups and specifically slightly later stage startups. And a big reason for that is, yes, I very much wanted the operating experience because I found it unique. As a banker, it's like I was advising companies on what they should do, having never actually worked for a company or like really understanding how they operated. So I wanted to get that operational experience. And I found that late stage startup experience, which is a little bit level of maturity, going from a very institutional place like a Goldman. It's still a little bit further along than some of the really early items where you're a bit more in the nitty gritty and truly building from scratch. But the reason I love startups versus another big tech company or a big corporation in general is the ability to wear multiple hats. I have found myself as a person who doesn't necessarily stay in my lane. And I don't mean that in any, I'm not getting in people's business when I shouldn't be, but it's very important to have the broader perspective of the business, understand how product and engineering are not only working together, but what they're prioritizing, what does it mean for the business. And so I found that capability at startups to be just a lot more appealing than being thrown in a 20-person finance team and owning revenue, as an example. And so that was a very intentional decision for late stage startups for me. And I really liked that sweet spot. I've since gone a little bit earlier stage in the startup realm. But yeah, I've really had a great experience in all of the startups I've worked with.
You mentioned space several times, and I just want to clarify for the listener, you do step into a CFO role only recently at True Anomaly, and we look forward to hearing about that. But prior to True Anomaly, you were with Relativity Space for 3 years. Very senior finance roles. You were not the finance leader, but these are you're overseeing finance and strategy. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes. Yes, I left Relativity as VP of Finance and Strategy.
Perhaps you had your eye on a CFO role, but you could also become a chief strategy officer somewhere, and we shouldn't have been surprised. Am I right, or no? You were aiming at the finance seat.
So, look, my view of the world is like the CFO has to be a strategist, and so title aside, sure, it's chief strategy officer, but like that sort of fits within the CFO mandate in my opinion. it's a really important way for how I think about my scope and why I see this as such a cross-functional role. Strategy can mean different things to different people. It can mean something different at a different organization. And so to me, it's more around, hey, what really fits within my scope, my roles and responsibilities? Strategy will sort of always be in that in some form or fashion, even if it's not in my title.
All right. I get the sense that I guess the question I was going to ask is, say there was a company with a CFO and they said, oh, we want you as a chief strategy officer. Somehow I don't think that role would have been as attractive to you. Am I right about that?
It depends. Again, it depends on the scope, depends on the people a little bit. But look, like strategy and finance go hand in hand. And so I would see it as very much a partnership. I grew up in finance. I'm a classic trained capitalist. It would be hard for me to take a major departure from core finance because the reality is a lot of strategy ends up in financials, which is why they're, pretty important and interrelated. But yeah, I think I've been fairly set on a CFO type role.
Well, let's find out about True Anomaly now. Tell us about this company. What is it about? It's fascinating, but please give us a nice overview, if you would.
Yeah, so we are a defense technology business focused on space security and sustainability. Which what that really means is, so we are in the center of the new space race, which is a little bit more complex in the era of exploration, which space has been an amazing, for many reasons in the world of exploration. But space has evolved into being a contested environment. We have Russia and China posing some of the biggest threats to U.S. national security. A lot of that actually starts or is managed or monitored in some form or fashion in space. So space is a really essential domain to really protecting peace, the interests of the U.S., our allies, and our partners. And we were founded by a team of space operators who really grew up in the relevant branches of Space Force, Air Force, wrote and helped define a lot of the tactics in modern space security operations. And they did that through the lens of, we founded True Anomaly because they didn't think there was a partner out there who was well positioned to actually go solve the needs, the problems that the space operators were facing. And so what we're doing is we're building an integrated solution for space superiority. This is comprised of a software platform. It's an operating system we call Mosaic. And then we have a spacecraft, which is an autonomous orbital vehicle that we call the Jackal. So we don't necessarily sell these things as like software and hardware as just traditional products. We really sell an integrated solution that focuses on training and readiness, space domain awareness, rapid response missions. It really encompasses the entire life of an operator, all the way from training through more responsive missions in a both offensive and defensive capabilities. So this business is relatively new, but we've done a ton in a short period of time. So in about 18 months, designed, built, integrated 2 spacecraft. We'll be launching those no earlier than March of next year on a SpaceX Transporter 10 mission. About a 35,000 square foot factory in Denver, just crossed the 100 employee mark. With about 20 million of signed contracts. And so in the world of defense tech, this is an incredibly fast moving business. And it's been, a lot of fun and quite busy in the last couple of months, but I'm enjoying it.
Could you perhaps give us an abbreviated history of the capital structure of the company? I know it's raised some money, and where are you at?
Yeah. So there's our seed stage investment earlier on. I think it was, January or so, 2022. That got them through. There's been a couple sort of safe notes, if you will. We did the Series A at the end of last year. That was led by Eclipse. And then we had some internal financing done earlier this year as well. And then I'll say always fundraising in some form or fashion, and I will leave it there.
It's funny, something sort of out on the frontier, as this company some would characterize most likely. It seems like biotech in some ways, as I speak to CFOs out of biotech. They have to be they spend a lot of time educating the public as to what they do.
Yes.
And I think that's part of your skill set. It clearly is, but I'm saying this is an area where maybe you excel.
Yeah, it requires education in many regards, right? And so I would say defense tech as a sector is having a bit of its its moment in the investment landscape, which is great. We had a lot of tailwinds. Space itself had some complexity because there's a lot of people who don't necessarily understand space, in the way that they might understand ground-based military operations. And so being able to actually couple not only selling into the government, which is nuanced, but coupled with a space strategy that requires a lot of education. And so you have to really tee people up in a way that is, actually helps them get up to speed on a business, right? So when you're in a diligence process, you need to make sure that people have the materials to help themselves get up to speed. They have the resources to really understand not only sort of what you're doing it, but why you're doing it, who the customer is, how the sales process works, and really be able to map out that whole life cycle of, okay, if you do all these things right, and I understand the business and the opportunity and the problem set, then at the end is a big sort of financial, a lucrative financial outcome. So you really have to spend a lot of time stitching that together. And so it starts, definitely with the narrative of how we came to be, why we're here, who the team is, what the opportunity is. There's a lot more depth beyond that to really help get, investors educated on what we're doing.
When you think about the company's future, the type of finance function you're architecting, let's say, can you share with us how you're prioritizing? I mean, I would imagine there's a controller that maybe you haven't brought into the organization yet, you will be. I don't know. But can you give us what some of the building blocks are?
Yeah. So I did actually recently hire a controller, and he's great. And so if he's listening to this at any point, credit to him. But that was an area that obviously, with my background, hiring a controller is one of the things that helps me sleep well at night. Right. It's one of these functions that is very critical and imperative to the business, needs to be well covered early on, particularly with someone with my background, which is not as strong in accounting. So that's a big hire within the finance stack, if you will. For me, I think as you might be able to pick up on, I have a mandate for some strategic lens for pretty much everybody on my team. I think it's very important to be able to navigate cross-functionally. It's not just a team that is really focused on budgeting and reporting. It's a team that helps drive the business forward, help influences where we're going, helps people understand why we're going there, and then how we're going to get there. So it's really important for me to have some stakeholders who can think not only through a financial lens, but also from a business and strategy standpoint. And so, there's obviously a traditional sort of FP&A or strategic finance function, if you will. In my past life, I had a business operations org, which really served as finance business partners to engineering. So a more technical group of individuals who can help engineers with things like, yes, budgeting, but also with trade studies, ROI, and that really served as a bit of a dotted line into a more traditional FP&A org. And then corporate development, which is very ambiguous and different depending on the company, but is a great part of sort of the strategy arm of a finance organization. Operationally, I very much like transparency amongst the finance org. I like cross-functionality amongst the finance organization. I want my whole team to really know sort of what everyone is doing, and so they can sort of bounce in and out, or at least have the perspective and the insights from, we'll say the reporting aspect of FP&A, but to say, hey, okay, how does that matter strategically? Are we on or off track? And use that to help influence, what they're doing within the business.
Now, are you, I mean, clearly you're paying attention to your cash, but what are the numbers you're looking at each morning for your...
Yeah, so that's one of the unique things about a business like this and of this stage is it's not a KPI driven business necessarily, right? It's not high volume. We don't have daily orders that I can go track and see if you're on and off track. And so a lot of times you sort of need to zoom out and think through, okay, where are we on track for where we need to be 12 months from now? And how do you actually think about the world that way, right? And so you sort of use a where am I going and work backwards approach. That helps inform if we're on track. And then okay, what are the critical path milestones that we need to be meeting as a business to make sure we are where we need to be 12 months from now. And so, look, I wish I had a dashboard that had numbers that sort of told me if, red, yellow, green in any given day. It's just not that type of business. And that's also what I love, because it requires you to think a bit more three-dimensionally and really sort of be able to look around the corner in a strategic way, connect the dots across the organization to really understand.
You were telling us about FP&A professionals. Will your FP&A team be using AI?
I would love to say yes. It's an area that I am excited to invest more in, I'll say personally from an educational standpoint. I think you always need to be learning. And obviously there is something to AI that's happening right now. And so, yes, there is an increasing emphasis on, I think, systems and data in the world of finance that is going to be required for real-time insights. And so I want to say yes. I think it's in the early innings. We'll see sort of as some of these things really play out and add value. I see it as probably happening more organically than inorganically, in the sense that, like, as you continue to build over time, these things will start to sort of just make their way into your natural processes, as opposed to say, hey, I need to go bring on, this third party firm to help instill AI into our organization or in our tools. In particular, in a world where a lot of companies are starting to build AI in, right? So I think it will happen a lot more organically than something on a more transactional basis.
Would we be surprised how your workforce is comprised in terms of the different skill sets? I mean, is it the nature of this company would lead us to believe, oh, there must be an expensive workforce in some sense?
Yeah, that's probably true, right? I mean, we have a lot of very high talent engineering base, and engineering is there are multiple areas of expertise within engineering. We have software. We have a world of space operators, which is a really unique skill set. We have folks with classified clearances, which adds some complexity to how you think about traditional compensation benchmarking. And so, yeah, it's a very unique workforce. Very fortunate to be around individuals like this, right? Again, I'm always here to learn, and I like the sort of diversity of thought, different backgrounds, and really be able to, again, get new information from people, see how people think about the world, and help influence how we should all be thinking about the world.
Okay. We always like to ask for a finance strategic moment. This is just some moment of insight that you've experienced along the way. Might have happened last week. It might have been 10 years ago. What comes to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
So let me start with a little bit of a process, probably more than anything, and then I'll get to some anecdotes here. But so, look, in my seat, I sort of view the world through the lens of a long range plan, the 3 to 5 year model, where you're going, why, how you're going to get there. If you can actually really build that in up front, get people aligned on what that looks like, that really drives a lot of alignment and serves as the foundation for the business. And so, it really takes a mission and vision, distills it down into a little bit more of an operating plan. It also ends up in a financial model at the end of the day. But I start here because, you'd be surprised at how often there's a disconnect in where you're going and why, right? And so I will use both a rocket company and a spacecraft company as examples. If you just start asking around, like, how many rockets are we going to build? How many spacecraft are we going to launch? You do that from the executive level down to the technician level. It is unbelievable how wide of a spread of numbers you can get, right? And so for me, it's incredibly important to build this type of plan because it's strategic and like, hey, here's how we actually build a business. But it really does provide people alignment and gets people, it provides a common ground for what we're actually doing, the pace that we're doing it, and what we're supposed to go execute against. And so I would say this is probably like what I use as my foundation for strategy because it really helps connect the dots. It also enables you to actually really articulate, hey, if you work hard, we go execute to this plan, there's a very lucrative financial outcome at the end of this, right? In startups, a lot of people are motivated or hope to be motivated in some form or fashion by equity, right? The mission is great work, great people is all great, but equity is a big part of this, right? And so to be able to use this as a tool to help influence where we're going, why, what it means, for us as a company, but also you personally, I find that to be a pretty important tool. So that again is probably more of my foundation as it comes to what is sort of the strategic element of this.
From episode 938, this is 1 Minute with Jason Leet, CFO of Xylo.
The other thing that we as a company are getting better on because it matters is just understanding our customer mix as far as segment, correlating that to at least at a higher level, given our stage of company today, what are the unit economics of those different segments, and do we like those or not? What's the retention rate look like by segment? What's the software versus services mix look like? Just all those kind of criteria, because that will help you based on what you are today, who you are today, your product functionality, help you guide you to what's the optimal place to focus your investments today.
Well, we asked you earlier while you were in investment banking about your observations about the C-suite executives. Now that you're one of them, we'd wonder what it is that maybe has surprised you. And again, you've been out of banking for a number of years now, but as you stepped into the operations role, what is the one thing you wish you knew, upon your arrival, that maybe banking just had sort of secluded you from?
That's a great question. I would say it's like the nitty gritty of how a business actually works, right? It's how the data works, how the systems work, where the information actually comes from, right? It's like a banker, you're given numbers and you work off that to go manipulate something. You come in as a startup, it's like, I don't even know where the numbers come from, right? And so there's an element of like truly how does the business operate at the most fundamental level, that you don't really see as a banker. And so as a banker going into an operating role, it's like a lot of the stuff ends up being, you're in a world of nitty gritty that you were sort of never in before. And that's one thing I wouldn't say necessarily caught me by surprise, but there is, you don't get that experience or see it in a more advisory capacity of banking.
You mentioned you're bringing a controller on board. Just curious how you might work with that person as you learn yourself. As you mentioned, the numbers are there. I imagine the controller is going to come in, and together you're going to discover which ones are being reported regularly and which ones aren't. Or it'll be a collaborative at first because you'll get educated as well as that person.
Very much. It's a partnership, and particularly, at this type of stage business, you really need to spend a lot of time getting to know someone, not on a personal and professional level in an interview process, but then once they're on board, you're spending a lot of time together, right? And you're building, and so you need to actually have very similar ways of thinking. You have to be aligned on sort of what type of information we need, how do we use that to be effective across the business, provide the right insights. And the controller is an incredibly important individual in making sure we have data and numbers that are timely and accurate and can ultimately be insightful for us across the business. So it's a really important role for me in particular. I am always here to learn. I told my controller when I hired him, I'm excited to learn from him. And so it's a really key aspect of the organization.
Mark, we always like to ask our guests to reflect a little on the personal side with us. We're wondering if there's something about you that most people generally don't know.
Ooh, great question. So I guess personally,
you tell us you hate to fly, or you.
No, I have two young kids at home, a 3-year-old boy and 18-month-old, and so anything that I had done historically has gone out the window as I focus on kids. But the biggest one that probably is a little more of a fun one is I collect vinyl records. I probably have 500 vinyl records, all types of genre of music. Music has really sort of always been my outlet in some form or fashion. Different genres. I go to a lot of shows. I've collected physical music for a long period of time. It was actually one of the things I bought and sold a lot of during my eBay business. There used to be a pretty great market for rare CDs. And so it was a little bit more of a trading role. So that's probably the most personal one, which I hold pretty closely in the grand scheme of things, but really one of my outlets.
And any other eBay milestones you can share with us? How large
I reached power seller status, which I can't actually quantify what it was, but I got a special badge and a sticker in the mail, and I was in high school, and I thought it was pretty awesome. It was based on volume or dollars sold. I did one fun one. I sold a $19,000 sculpture via eBay that someone flew in from London to come pick up.
So some great details there for us. We always like to ask for a book selection, actually. Would you have one? It doesn't have to be a business book. Anything you've read that influenced your thinking?
I'm not sure if I'd say it influenced my thinking, but I am currently reading a book called Ghost Fleet. It's, that's probably, if anyone actually knows what that is, it won't be that much of a surprise for the world that I operate in. It's really about modern or the next world war. And I'm sort of squarely in the world of defense right now. I didn't grow up with a military background, and so this has been a fun read for me recently.
Where are you guys based, by the way?
So we are based in Denver, Colorado, specifically Centennial. I am technically remote. I am based in Los Angeles, and we have a pretty remote workforce in general.
Okay. And given the government's going to be a large customer someday, will there be a Northern Virginia?
There will be a DC presence, yes. Yeah, and that's important.
Not too distant future. Okay. Well, we are up to our final question where we like to ask you to look forward. We're wondering about the next 12 months. You gave us a few clues already what your priorities are, but let's just ask them, what are those 12-month priorities looking forward?
Yeah, 2024, particularly within the finance and accounting world, for us at True Anomaly is really about building. We have some improvements to do, not only in sort of the processy side of the business, the controls, but also the systems. And for me, systems is yes, important from an accounting standpoint, but also to help enable other stakeholders. I'm a very big fan of like real-time insights to how we're doing on a project spend basis. And so really trying to invest and get those stood up for 2024 to make sure we're a little bit more operationally functioning, continuing to grow the team. And then as a business, we have a really important 2024 for us. We're launching our first 2 spacecraft, a few big contractual milestones that are around the corner. And so I think it's a really a year of inflection points, and I'm excited for the year to come.
Well, Mark Seidel, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you, Zach. Thanks for having me.
Hello, Thought Leader listeners. As you have perhaps already heard or even seen, we're now featuring the career lessons and moments of strategic insight shared by our CFO guests as Thought Leader videos. You can now find these videos on our blog at cfothoughtleader.com and, of course, our newsletters, but also on LinkedIn. If you haven't already, please go ahead and follow our CFO Thought Leader LinkedIn company page, and you'll be certain not to miss a single Thought Leader video debut. CFO Thought Leader, the #1 thought leadership platform exclusively for and by CFOs. As always, thank you for listening.